We bring in Texas Republican Congressman, member of the House Intelligence and Appropriations Committee, Will Hurd. Good to see you, sir. As always, appreciate you being with us. Based on Jillian's reporting, every 60 days we're going to do something worse, says the Iranians. That kind of sounds like blackmail.
It does. And here's what's crazy to me. Many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk like Iran is the victim. They are not the victim in this situation. They are the culprit. They are the ones that are breaking the terms of the deal and having more enriched uranium than what they're supposed to. They are the ones that are the largest state sponsor of terror. They are the ones that have conventional arms that are threatening the rest of the countries in that region. The Iranians are the culprit, and now it's going to be we need the Russians, the Chinese, the Brits, the French to come along.
Have the Iranians, though, been emboldened by the fact that they've been able to do all of the bad things that you laid out with effectively no meaningful response? There's been sanctions, but there's not been any kind of military response by the United States to that litany you just laid out.
Leland, when I was in the CIA, I learned something. When there's not consequences to bad behavior, that bad behavior is going to continue. There needs to be consequences, and I think the level of economic sanctions that we've put on the Iranians is hurting their economy. If we had our European allies adding on to that, that would further cripple their ability to
But should the Trump
administration
be willing to go at it alone if the Europeans don't come along?
Of course, I think that's the path that we're on. But if we had our allies on board, this would be an even stronger move, and I think it would make the Iranians have to think twice before continuing this escalation every 60 days. I don't think anybody wants a kinetic war between the U.S. and Iran, but we should be using all of our levers when it comes to economics and also technical means in order to have consequences.
Do you think the Iranians believe that there is the possibility of a kinetic war? Are they living really under that fear, or did the fact that they shot down the drone and nothing happened embolden them?
Well, I think there is a concern and fear within the Iranian regime if this does escalate beyond where things are currently. But we have to remember, they have already attacked, and they've escalated things in the Middle East. They've attacked civilian infrastructure in Saudi Arabia. They've attacked boats on the sea, and now they've shot down a plane, or an unmanned plane in the air. They've been pretty provocative, and again, there should be consequences to this behavior, and I think continued economic pressure, but also we should be reaching out to groups within inside Iran, that if the Iranian people ultimately stand up again, letting them know that we would ultimately have their backs.
Yeah, a la the Green Revolution of 2009. Bring you back here domestically to the fight right now about immigration. Still no comprehensive solution even on the horizon. Yesterday, one of your colleagues, Democrat from California, Congressman DeSaulnier, said this unsolicited about your legislation. Take a listen.
We had a bill last session by Will Hurd, a Republican from Texas, and Pete Aguilar, a Democrat. I would support that bill. I hope we bring it back. That is a compromise worked out by a Republican and a Democrat.
His conversation, though, is he said he didn't think the president was acting in good faith and wanted a solution. He said he felt as though certain Republicans thought this was better as an election wedge issue than it is something to get solved, or a feather in your cap for getting it solved. Do you think that's true on the other side with Democrats as well?
Look, it's absolutely the case on the other side. You can't vote against funding to give to HHS and ICE and Border Patrol to deal with this problem. You can't vote against an additional $2 billion to help these kids. You can't vote against an additional 100 immigration judges and then show up in these facilities and be outraged that they can't handle the current crisis they're dealing with. Border Patrol has been saying for months that they can't handle this current crisis.
Real quick, you live in a purple district, perhaps the purplest of all districts based on the last election. Sure. I don't need to tell you that. And Texas is becoming at least questionable about whether or not it is a deep red or a purple state. With the Hispanic vote down there, does is there a constituency, shall we say, in your district and others of Hispanic voters who want to see the president get tougher on immigration, who want to see the wall built, or is it a wedge issue for them?
No, people want to see the problem solved. People do not want to see children in facilities that they shouldn't be in. This is a public safety issue for the communities along the border. People want to see this streamlined. People also want to see us go after the human smugglers that are bringing many of these people into our country. That's what they want to see, and they want to see us streamline legal immigration, and that we continue to benefit from the brain drain and the hard-working drain, but let's do it legally. That's what folks in my district want to see.
And as you point out, folks on both sides are making that difficult to come by.
Well, we have a new threat from Iran, with the regime warning of possible retaliation against the UK after the seizure of an Iranian oil tanker by British troops. And this is as we're already in the midst of an escalating tension in the region. So Fox News' Lucas Tomlinson at the Pentagon with the details. Lucas?
Susan, Iran summoned Britain's ambassador over the incident, which comes more than 2 weeks after Iranian forces shot down that U.S. drone. President Trump issued this fresh warning to Iran before leaving for New Jersey.
We'll see what happens with Iran. Iran has to be very, very careful.
While Americans were celebrating Independence Day off the coast of Gibraltar near Spain, Royal Marines commandeered an oil tanker filled with suspected Iranian oil. The Marines fast roping from a helicopter and climbing up the hull from speedboats near the entrance to the Mediterranean. National Security Advisor John Bolton congratulated the British, quote, "Excellent news. The UK has detained the supertanker Grace 1 laden with Iranian oil bound for Syria in violation of EU sanctions. America and our allies will continue to prevent regimes in Tehran and Damascus from profiting off this illicit trade." Now, Spain's top diplomat says U.S. intelligence tipped off the British.
It was a demand by the United States to the United Kingdom, and we are looking into how it affects our sovereignty.
This comes as Iran's president threatens to enrich its stockpile of low-enriched uranium past the cap set by the 2015 landmark nuclear deal. Highly enriched uranium is needed to make nuclear weapons. President Trump walked away from the nuclear deal last year. But other countries in the agreement are trying to hold it together. The president wants a new, wide-ranging agreement to include Iran's 2,000 ballistic missiles. And today, a former Iranian leader in its Islamic Revolutionary Guard says Iran needs to take that tanker back by force. Another official says they should seize a British tanker as well. Susan?
Lucas, thank you.
All right, let's dig into this a little more. Joining us now, William Ruger, Charles Koch Institute Vice President for Research. William, I'm wondering what you're making of this specific incident and also how it raises tensions in the Persian Gulf and how Iran may react in terms of retaliation.
Well, thanks for having me here to talk about this important issue. I mean, I think one of the things we have to remember is that we shouldn't be surprised by Iranian behavior in some way, because since we withdrew from the deal, there's a lot less incentive for Iran to comply and to behave. And I think what we need to remember and keep really in mind here is that President Trump talked about how Mideast wars are for losers, right? They're not good for American national interest. And so what I think we need to do is keep in mind that we need to find a way forward here. And I think the president is committed to negotiations that could get us a deal. And we shouldn't have preset conditions, because that will prevent the opportunity to really get there without war. Because again, war isn't in our national interest here.
And does it help President Trump with his mission that other countries are standing behind him? Are we stronger if we're united, for example, when taking on Iran?
Sure, but again, the United States is the most important actor in this, and it's really up to President Trump, I think, to set the tone here. And I think this will be good for the United States to negotiate, to find a path forward, but it'll also be good for President Trump here, because electorally, it doesn't make sense to get into another endless war in the Middle East, and he talked about that. He talked about that during the campaign. He's talked about that since, and I think some of the polling that we've seen bear that out. A poll that was done by Vote Vets and Concerned Veterans for America, for example, recently found that a majority of Americans oppose attacks on Iran. And I think that this is a case, again, where President Trump's interest here is in peace, both politically and for our country.
Yeah, no, the president has definitely made that clear. But of course, Iran hasn't really stopped punching back at the United States. President Rouhani actually saying that it's going to continue to enrich uranium and they're going to move this ball forward. So what happens if President Trump's hand is forced?
Well, again, hopefully he'll cut through this and he'll find a path that is different from what his advisor John Bolton probably wants. And again, I think the president wants peace. I'm not sure that all of his advisors do. And I think really the president needs to assert himself to break through this because, again, peace is in our interests here. We could deter Iran. That's really important that we do that, and we signal that we will strike back if we're hit. But the fact is getting to peace is the answer here. It's good for America. It's good for the global economy. It's good for our allies. And it'll be good for Iran to sit down and cut through this as well.
Well, what brought this all into the forefront again is that Iran's economy is struggling because of the sanctions. Is one negotiating tactic from the president to potentially ease up a little bit, give them some room to breathe?
Well, there has to be an off-ramp here because if you put preconditions on negotiations, if you have a maximum pressure campaign where the Iranians are forced to either capitulate completely or then try to find a way out of that, I don't think that the regime is going to just give up. And so it's really important to find that off-ramp so that you can get to the negotiating table and meet our shared interests in something more peaceful than some types of strikes like we were worried about a week and a half ago.
William Ruger, thank you so much. Great to talk to you today.
Thank you for having me.